What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. The Hoenn region is an embarrassment of riches in terms of variety of Pokémon. There's an amazing array of singles, 2- and 3-stage lines, and so many great type combinations. However, that doesn't mean they're mostly dual-typed. In fact, once again, we see a majority, 52%, as remaining a single type. And this is even after other members got the fairy type. So with all of these Pokémon, what could we do to make them all have a secondary typing? We'll do our best to find a good fit for each Pokémon, but not all of them are as open to such changes, which is why we have the ranking system. So of course we will begin with the Trico line, first in the Dex, and it's probably no surprise, but I will make these Pokémon part Dragon type. Now it's not just because of the Mega, that doesn't hurt, but I would have done it anyway. And you might say that would alter the type effectiveness between the starters, but really, at this point, I don't care. The others have been gifted second types even as soon as their middle evolution, so it's about time the Sceptile family got their due as well, so I'd give it 2.5 stars. Little Torchic is also just a pure fire type, but I don't think it makes sense to call it a fighting type like its later stages, so I will be going with the flying type. It's not the first time that we've seen a bird with no wings as a flying Pokémon, and Torchic already naturally learns flying type moves. I would give it 1 star since it's not necessary, but it would still be pretty cool to be super effective against its later forms. And the last starter, Mudkip, was also a pure water type, but it's not too far of a stretch to slap on the ground type so that it can be like its other forms. After all, it's got Mud right in the name and has ground type attacks available to it, so I would probably give it 2 stars since it never hurts to have another ground type. The Poochyena line is next, and honestly the dark type is a pretty great fit, so I think normal is just about the only thing we could add. I'll give it 1 star only for the fact that it could have given us the combination over a decade early, but it is a fairly bad combination in my book, so we don't actually want to hinder Mightyena so much. Speaking of dark and normal, we come to the original Zigzagoon line, and this time, you guessed it, I'm going with the ground type. You can't stop me. I know I've done it for all of the regional rodents thus far, but I feel like this one is an even better fit than those other ones, since they are so speedy and agile on the ground, so 2 stars from me. Then we have our good buddy Wurmple, and honestly it took me years to get it straight that it wasn't a poison type. It's got that poisonous horn and poison sting just like Weedle, so I always just kind of assumed, which made it extra confusing when it became the pure bug Silcoon and Cascoon. Not as much for Cascoon because I've always thought that it was a poison type too, and I never really checked because I always wanted Beautifly. But honestly, poison doesn't seem to make as much sense for Silcoon, neither does anything else. So while Cascoon definitely should have been a poison type, and Wurmple probably could be, I'm gonna say that Silcoon should remain as it is. And if that were the case, it could be another cool Pokemon that loses a type upon evolution. Next, we don't see a single-typed Pokemon until Seedot, and while it might be easy enough to copy its evolutions, I once had a whole bit about how an expressionless acorn isn't really dark-type material, so instead I'll go with Rock. One of, if not the only main focuses of this Pokemon is its hard exterior, so providing the Rock type might actually let it live up to those expectations of durability. I wasn't crazy about it at first, but it has grown on me a bit, as acorns do, so I'll give it a star. The next one is kind of a no-brainer to me, with Shroomish becoming a poison type. Hoenn doesn't really have too many, but this pug-faced mushroom's dex entries and abilities like Effect Spore and Poison Heal make me think that it should have been a poison type to begin with. The only reason it probably wasn't is because they didn't want a poison type to evolve into a fighting type, but I think that's pretty cool, and Hoenn is no stranger to shifting types between evolutions anyway. The normal type Slakoth line comes next, and I feel like fighting could be a good fit. Vigoroth especially I could see, but it might work with the other ones too, just keeping that extra power in reserve for the right moment to strike. So I'll give it 2 stars. Similarly, we have the normal Whismur family as well, which I would obviously give the sound type. What's that? It still doesn't exist. You sure? Okay, well, it might be a little bit out there, but hear me out on the flying type. The main weapon of these creatures is sound, and what is sound but vibrations moving through the air? And these weird subwoofer hippos can certainly pump out a lot of vibrating air, so maybe you don't buy it, but I defy you to come up with a better option, and I'll give it 1 star. The Makuhita family is one that I had to ponder for a while, but I think maybe ground could work. They are rather hefty and require a solid stance rooting them to the ground, so while they do seem like maybe the quintessential example of a pure fighting type, I'll give it at least half a star, if for nothing else so that they can have more variety like their Medicham counterpart. Now, I don't really like Nosepass at all, but I am pretty excited to give it the electric type. One, because I don't get to use that one much, but it also just makes sense. Nosepass is all about magnetism being a living compass, and it can learn so many electric-type moves already, so they were already leaning in this direction. They were so close. They just needed to pull the trigger so that we could be given this combination way sooner than Alola, which, by the way, also use magnets, so there. Then immediately the Skitty line appears, and I don't think the Fairy type will be a huge shock to anybody. These fluffy felines are graceful and playful, and just that little bit mysterious for them to perfectly pull off the type. I don't think they need it to be relevant, although some might argue otherwise, but I'll give them a grand 2.5 stars. Then in contrast we have the Canine Electrike line, which I will make the Dragon type. These thundering hounds have a little more to them than your standard mammal. After all, the Megaform is just a force of nature, so I think they could tap into some kind of latent dragon heritage that they might possess. Plus, it's a nice touch with the fairy cats for the continuing feud, so I would say it's at least worth 1 star. And since all Electric-type Pokemon in Hoenn were right next to each other, we have the duo of Pikachu clones and Pluswood Minun. And I really just have to go with normal on this one. These cheering mice just don't seem fairy to me, sorry for those that were expecting it. Besides, if one of them were fairy, then the other one would have to be the polar opposite, with dark or something like that, which just doesn't fit at all, so we'll leave them as is. But then we find another pair of Pokemon with Volbeat and Illumise, and I've got this one down. Volbeat should be a fire type, and Illumise should be electric. I've already discussed this in multiple videos at this point, but basically, if you don't think they should have spruced up these forgettable bugs to be a literal Firefly and Lightning Bug, you're wrong. This is how they always should have been. 3 stars. However, the next one was a bit harder with the Gulpin line. I mean, what do you do with 2 minimalistic poison sacks? Well, I think perhaps the Bug type could work here. They're a little more than giant blobulous stomachs, so really just giving them a malleable slug-like body structure is probably the best we could do. And I'm surprised at how well it fits, so I would give it at least 2 stars. Next is the biggest Pokemon of all with the Wailord family, and while they are pretty standard whales, I think the flying type could fit. Given its massive size and relatively low weight, people have done the math and Wailord is less dense than air, by a lot, so there's no reason this massive Pokemon couldn't just take off into the sky. Its category is the float whale Pokemon, so it could easily be the clouds where it does its floating. Wilmer might not be as able to pull it off, but it's a fair lead-in, so I would give this one at least 1.5 stars. Then we come to the chronically underrated Torkoal, and here I would use the rock type. Torkoal's defense is phenomenal with its shell that looks like it's made of rock, and if nothing else, it burns coal inside of itself to produce all of that smoke. Plus, the only other prominent coal Pokemon we know comes out to be this typing as well, so I'll give it a good 2 stars. Next we have Spoink and Grumpig, and not to sound like a broken record, but I will be going with Rock again. Spoink's psychic abilities are tied to the pearl on its head, and this carries over into Grumpig as well, to the point where they get Power Gem as a level up move. I think this emphasis on the jewels that they use to amplify their mental powers is plenty of justification to give them at least 1.5 stars. Then of course we have Spinda, and I think it's easy enough to give it the psychic type as well. This little stupering bear is all about keeping opponents off balance with hypnosis or confusion, so it's clearly leaning to the ESP direction, but I won't say it needed to be this combination, so we'll just give it 2 stars. And then there's Trapinch, and I think we can all guess that the bug type was coming up. The Flygon family has long been speculated on for not being part bug, but while I can let it slide with the other 2, Trapinch is just a single type. It's also got Ant right in its category name, and given that the bug type doesn't really add too many weaknesses that ground can't handle, I'll go ahead and say that Trapinch should have been a bug from the start. Its desert friend Cacnea is also pure typed, and while some might suggest going for dark like its evolution, I'm going with ground. Cacnea doesn't really seem all that nefarious, and as I just said, it's a desert-dwelling cactus, so being down in the sand is just second nature. I think this makes a great deal of sense, but I will acknowledge it's not needed, so I'll give it 2 stars. Zangoose is up next, and I'm going with the fighting type. I don't think it's too hard to imagine this ferocious cat ferret tearing apart foes with some good fighting stab moves, especially with those claws. But there's also its mortal rival in Seviper, who I would give the dark type. This sharp serpent has the tools and the attitude to mess you up, and I like the dynamic that it creates with the fighting type Zangoose, so I would give both of these Pokemon 2 stars. Corphish is next, and this one I kind of had a hard time with, but I think I'll go with dark. I know this base stage is a far cry from the menace of Crawdaunt, however, while not being evil, Corphish can have an attitude and a mischievous side, which seems to be enough for some other Pokemon, so I'd allow it at maybe half a star. Feebas is just a fish, so really normal is just about all we can do, but really we don't need it, 0 stars. However, with its evolution Milotic, it's a different story. This sea serpent I could absolutely see gaining the dragon type, given its beautiful scales and overall majestic nature. I would give it a good 2 stars. Then we see Castform, and I'll admit I had some trouble at first, but then it hit me, the flying type. It's just a little cloud, so the flying type is perfect. In fact, maybe it should have been the first pure flying type, but at the very least it could keep flying in all of the other form changes as well, so I would say it's worth 2 good stars. Kecleon is next, and I think this could be a dragon type as well. We have plenty of little cute dragons, so what if Kecleon doesn't evolve? I'll only give it 1.5 stars because it would interfere with the type-changing gimmick that it has. Then we start our ghost group with the Shuppet line, and I think the normal type would be perfect. These Pokemon may be spirits, but they're possessing simple fabrics, so I think their physical forms should be taken into account. And Normal and Ghost is a fantastic typing that we still don't have, so I would give this one 3 stars for sure. Then there's the Duskull line, and this one I would use Dark. I'm not quite as excited on this one, but I do see it. It's a scary skull/mummy kind of thing, so pretty dark, but it's not as convincing. And they don't need it anyway, so just 1 star. Chimecho is a pure psychic type that often gets overlooked, but I think the flying type could help with that. It's constantly floating already, and as a wind chime it is intimately tied to the air as it is, so I think this is a pretty convincing setup with 2.5 stars. Next is Absol, and this one was a bit harder as well, but I'm inclined to go with Psychic. Absol's whole thing is that it can sense disasters coming with its horn, so wouldn't it make sense to have a little psychic power fueling that precognition? It works in the lore, but I doubt it would be as useful in practice, so just 1 star from me. Wynot is another single-type Pokemon, and like its relative in Johto, I think the Dark type could be a good fit. It's meant to take hits and then send them right back, but like the last one as well, it will only get 1 star. Now we have Snorunt and Glalie, which are Pokemon that I love, and this might sound strange, but I'm going to give Snorunt the Ghost typing. It's said to be based on a Japanese spirit that lives in the cold, and it's like some kind of hat that some poor soul might lose when they disappear into the mountains. Not to mention it feeds pretty well into the later Sinnoh evolution. Whereas Glalie I will give the Rock typing. Its Pokédex literally says it has a body made out of rock, so there you go. And I like that it would be super effective against other ice types. I'll give these ones 2 stars each. The Clamperl line is next, and to start out, I would give this little bivalve the Rock typing as well, for its incredibly hard shell and pearls both. As for Huntail and Gorbis, I think the more outwardly vicious one of the 2 would be a Dark type, whereas the more secretly creepy one I think could pull off the Fairy type. And it would make a great rivalry between them. But altogether, I would give Clamperl and Gorbis the 2-star rating, but Huntail I think would be better suited with 1. And of course, Luvdisc should be a Fairy type. We know this. I don't know why they're pretending this heart-shaped fish is anything but. 3 stars for sure. We then have one of the pseudo-legendary lines with Bagon and Shelgon, who I will also give the Rock type. Bagon is notorious for its hard head, and Shelgon is of course encased in nigh impenetrable armor. Also, I like how this ties into its lore, never being able to fly because of it being too heavy, finally shedding this weight in its final form, so I would give this a good 2 stars. Now for some legends, we have all of the Reggies who I really have no idea what to do with. Probably just normal, because what else can you do with literal golems made out of 1 material? Plus this could tie into Regigigas, but honestly, no stars, just keep them as it is. The mascots of Kyogre and Groudon are also the sole embodiment of a single type, so what can we do? Well, for Kyogre, I would recommend Ice. since it is accustomed to being in the cold depths of the ocean and is able to use a lot of Ice-type moves, for just 1 star. As for its counterpart, I was hesitant to give Groudon the Fire type. Now I realize that its primal form does have this type, but on top of that, it can regularly use Fire-type moves, like its once signature move, Eruption. So much to my surprise, I think Groudon could actually get 2 stars here. And lastly, we have Deoxys, which is a crazy outer space virus alien, so what could it possibly be? It does have a crystal in its chest, but this is one time I don't think rock will be enough. Given the rest of its body is so strange, I think maybe bug could be its only fit. You might not agree, but it can regenerate its body to incredible lengths, sort of like a worm. So I don't know what else it could be since there's no cosmic type like some people want, but I think bug could suit this mythical from space just fine with 1 star. So those are the extra types that I would give all of the Pokémon in Hoenn. It seems that this time Flying and Rock got a much bigger pool than before, so I'll be interested to see what types get a bigger representation in regions from the future. How would you make all the Hoenn Pokémon dual-typed? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And we'll see you around next time!